Hi, and welcome back to the Elsie McClure version. We are in John chapter 19, verse 1. Then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and arrayed him in a purple robe. They came up to him saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and struck him with their hands. I don't know if you guys have seen a picture of the crown of thorns, but it's more like a helmet of thorns. And they were very sharp. And I believe there was about 60 puncture wounds on his head from the crown. Verse 4. Pilate went out again and said to them, "See, I am bringing him out to you that you may know that I find no guilt in him." Mind you, at this point, Jesus is bleeding profusely and bloodied and beat and all sorts of things. Verse 5. So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to the law he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God." Now, does that not contradict what they literally said the chapter before, where they were like, "Oh, our law prevents us from killing anyone," but you are. Just because you didn't physically do it doesn't mean you didn't do it, right? And that's why Jesus talks about the heart's intentions. They have murdered Jesus in their hearts. And yet they're like, "Well, we can't physically do it." It's so sad that they would think that they're not responsible for this. You know, like that. Nobody, there is something to be said for, you always have a choice. I believe that. You always have a choice. Nobody can make you do anything, right? You can't make someone mad. They have a choice and they get to choose if they want to be mad or not. And even if you were holding a gun and somebody was like, "Shoot that person," you either pull the trigger or they pull the trigger, right? You either shoot them or they shoot them. They might be on top of your hands forcing your hand to do it, but you didn't do it, right? There's a difference. Nobody can make you do anything. In this situation, Pilate is also guilty, right? He didn't want to, but the Jews didn't make him. Now, the Jews had already murdered in their hearts, so they were already guilty. But we always have a choice. Verse 8. When Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. He entered his headquarters again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. I don't even know if Jesus could speak at this point. I mean, I know he does later, but he was bloodied and bruised. The man was half a man. They couldn't even recognize him as a man, right? So Pilate said to him, "You will not speak to me. Do you not know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." That's a really good reminder for us. There is no authority given to anyone that God did not give. And Jesus is saying that the Jews are more guilty. Anyway, verse 12. From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, and in Aramaic, Gabbatha. That's really interesting. If you guys have read Narnia, they called it the stone table that he was killed on. I never caught that. The stone pavement, stone table. Verse 14. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." They cried out, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So he delivered him over to be crucified. So they took Jesus, and he went out bearing his own cross to the place called the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on either side, and Jesus between them. Pilate also wrote an inscription and put it on the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." I do think Pilate was compelled slightly by his wife. If you've read the other Gospels, Pilate's wife has a dream and is like, "Yo, don't get mixed up with Jesus. Like, don't kill him. Don't partner with this. He is the Son of God," right? I wonder if he believed. But because of fear, he caved. Many Pharisees, out of fear, would not publicly support him, right? There was a lot of people who followed Jesus, but out of fear, they did not follow him. Verse 20. Many of the Jews read this inscription, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Aramaic, in Latin, and in Greek. I mean, Pilate went big and home, okay? That man said every language gonna know. That's crazy. Verse 21. So the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but rather this man said, 'I am King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." I mean, at least he had a little bit of a backbone. When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his garments and divided them into 4 parts, 1 part for each soldier. Also his tunic. But the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. Wonder if that was usual. So they said to one another, "Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to see whose it shall be." This was to fulfill the scripture which says, "They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots." So the soldiers said these things, but standing by the cross of Jesus. So the soldiers did these things, but standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. I wonder who Clopas was, because I don't recall him being mentioned yet. But John mentions him, so there has to be some sort of something. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, that disciple took her to his home. Now, is this the same disciple that was in the courtyard? I feel like John was. But John usually references himself as the one that Jesus loved. So I don't know. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was. 28. After this, Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, said, to fulfill scripture, "I thirst." A jar full of sour wine stood there. So they put a sponge full of the sour wine on a hyssop branch and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished." And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Verse 31. Since it was the day of preparation, and so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for the Sabbath was a high day, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. I think it's interesting that John doesn't write the story of the thief on the cross. He also doesn't write some of the things that Jesus says. So for some reason, it was John either, I don't want to say he didn't think it was important, But he didn't have it put in here, or God didn't have it put in here. And I wonder why. I do know that because all the stories don't match, it is actually more, has more potential that they're true. They are true, obviously. But I just wonder, what was his goal when he was writing this? Because that's why he put the parts he put in there. Anyway, verse 34. 33. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with the spear, and at once there came out blood and water. He who saw it has borne witness. His testimony is true, and he knows what he is telling is the truth. That you also may believe. I'm assuming he who saw it has borne witness. I'm assuming John is talking about himself. So, 26, for these things took place that the scripture might be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. And again, another scripture says, they will look on him whom they have pierced. It's very interesting. John is putting 2 and 2 together with the scripture. It's like if he was sitting here talking to us and was like, hey, just so you know, this is why he did that. Very telling a story. It's one of the reasons I really appreciate John's book, is because it's more personable, and it's more, it is a little bit more like the Gospel for Dummies. Not, like those books. Because he really gives like more, hey, just so you know, this happened. And like more backstory, makes it more entertaining. Verse 38. Maybe not backstory, that's not the right word. More name dropping, because he do be dropping names. It's hilarious. Verse 38. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for the fear of the Jews, again, doing it in secret, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him permission. So he came and took away his body. Nicodemus also, who earlier had come to Jesus by night, came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds in weight. So again, somebody who was doing it in private. So they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen cloths with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. Now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. So because of the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was close at hand, they laid Jesus there. So that's the end of that chapter. I think the question really that I get from this is, what choice are you going to make? Are you going to loudly follow the Lord, follow Jesus, and potentially stir up trouble? Or are you going to be complacent and quiet and follow him in secret? Till tomorrow.